There's a place in America where the ground breathes, where steam rises through cracks in the earth like the exhalations of something buried alive, where the asphalt melts beneath your feet and the air tastes like burning metal. A place where an entire town was swallowed, not by flood or earthquake, but by fire. A fire that's been burning for over 60 years. A fire that will burn for another 250 more. This is Centralia, Pennsylvania, and this is the story of how hell opened its mouth and refused to close it. Before 1962, Centralia was the kind of town you'd drive through and barely notice. Just over 1,000 people living in a grid of narrow streets carved into the Pennsylvania mountains. Coal miners mostly, hard men with black lungs and rough hands who descended into the earth every morning and crawled back out every night. Their fathers had been miners, their grandfathers too. Centralia existed because of coal, built on top of a massive anthracite seam that stretched for miles beneath the surface. The kind of coal that burns hot and clean. The kind of coal that made fortunes in the 19th century. But by the 1960s, most of those mines were closed, abandoned, left to fill with water and darkness and the ghosts of men who died underground. The tunnels remained, though, hundreds of miles of them, a labyrinth carved into the mountain's bones. May 27th, 1962, Memorial Day weekend. The town council had a problem with their landfill. It sat in an old strip mine pit near the Oddfellows Cemetery, and it was overflowing. Rats, smell, garbage piling up before the holiday. So they did what they'd done before. They hired 5 volunteer firefighters to burn it. Simple, clean, effective. They lit the fire that evening, watched the flames consume the trash, hosed it down with water when they were done, went home. Problem solved. Except 2 days later, the fire came back. The firefighters returned, doused it again, but it kept reigniting. On June 4th, they brought bulldozers to stir through the burnt garbage, searching for hidden embers. That's when they found the hole, 15 feet wide, several feet deep, hidden at the bottom of the pit beneath layers of ash and trash. And that hole led directly into the abandoned coal mines beneath Centralia. The fire had already gotten inside. They tried to stop it. God knows they tried. They dug trenches and filled them with clay. They flushed the tunnels with water and sand. They sealed openings with concrete barriers. But coal fires are different from normal fires. They don't need much oxygen. They can smolder for decades in near darkness, creeping through seams of fuel that stretch for miles. And once they're burning deep underground, they're almost impossible to extinguish. The fire spread slowly at first, silently. Through the 1960s and into the 70s, it crept through the honeycomb of abandoned mines like an infection spreading through a body. Above ground, life continued. Kids went to school. Churches held services. People complained about the weather and argued about politics. But beneath their feet, something was waking up. Something that had been sleeping for millions of years. The first real sign came in the mid-1970s. Residents started noticing cracks in their roads. Small ones at first. Hairline fractures in the asphalt. Then wider splits. Steam began rising from these cracks. Thin wisps at first, easy to dismiss. Then thicker plumes that billowed into the cold morning air, like breath from some buried giant. The ground grew warm in certain spots, then hot. Hot enough to burn your hand if you touched the pavement. Hot enough to melt the soles of your shoes if you stood too long. Trees near the affected areas started dying. Their leaves turned yellow, then brown, then black. Their roots were cooking underground, slowly roasting in earth that had become an oven. Birds that nested in those trees were found dead on the ground beneath them, just dropped mid-flight, poisoned by invisible gases that rose from the soil: carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, the breath of the fire below. But it was Valentine's Day, 1981, when Centralia's nightmare became impossible to ignore. 12-year-old Todd Domboski was playing in his grandmother's backyard with his cousin Eric. It was a Saturday morning, cold, sunny, the kind of winter day where your breath makes clouds and the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. Todd noticed thin wisps of smoke rising from the grass near a tree. He walked over to investigate. Curious, just a kid being a kid. The ground opened beneath him. No warning, no sound, just suddenly gone. A sinkhole 4 feet across tore open under his feet, and Todd dropped straight down. He plunged through hot, crumbling earth that gave way like quicksand. He fell and kept falling. 150 feet of empty space below him. His body slammed into sticky, collapsing soil halfway down. He tried to climb, but the walls crumbled with every movement. The heat was unbearable, 350 degrees. His jacket started to smoke. The air burned his lungs. Carbon monoxide flooded up from below. 11 parts per million, enough to kill. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Just the roaring heat, and the smell of burning, and the terrible realization that he was being swallowed alive. He grabbed a clump of tree roots, held on, screamed for help. His cousin Eric heard him, 14 years old, heard the scream and ran over and saw Todd's orange baseball cap, barely visible in the smoking pit. Eric didn't hesitate. He dropped to his stomach at the edge of the hole and reached down, grabbed Todd's arm with both hands. The heat was blistering. The smoke made his eyes water. He could feel the ground beneath him starting to give way too. But he held on. One strong pull. That's all he had in him. He yanked Todd up and out, just seconds before the boy would have suffocated. They stumbled back from the hole together as a massive plume of black smoke burst from the opening. When officials came to measure it later, they found temperatures inside that could melt lead. Carbon monoxide levels that would kill a grown man in less than 3 minutes. Todd had been seconds from death, seconds from becoming another victim of whatever was burning beneath Centralia. The hole is still there, still smoking, still waiting, but the sinkholes weren't the only terror. Throughout the late 1970s and early 80s, something else was happening. Something that made people afraid to sleep in their own homes. In the middle of the night, residents would hear a deep, resonant boom from beneath their houses. Not an explosion exactly, more like a pressure release. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it. Floors would suddenly radiate heat. Walls would crack from the inside out. Basements would fill with smoke. One resident woke up to find her kitchen floor glowing red through the linoleum. The heat was so intense, the tiles were bubbling. Another family watched their basement stairs collapse as the wooden supports charred from invisible flames below. In some homes, the ground temperature beneath the foundation reached 180 degrees. Dishes shattered in cabinets from the pressure changes. Windows cracked. Paint peeled off walls. One woman reported being physically shoved out of bed by a sudden blast of heat that rose through the floor like something had punched up from below. Imagine that. Imagine trying to sleep knowing the ground beneath you is cooking, that your home, the place you're supposed to feel safest, is slowly being destroyed by forces you can't see or control. That any moment, the floor might crack open and hell itself might reach up through the foundations. The smell was constant too. Sulfur, matches, rotten eggs. A stench seeped through floorboards and walls. It got into clothes and hair and lungs. People couldn't escape it. In 1979, the mayor of Centralia, who owned the local gas station, lowered a thermometer into his underground fuel tank. The gasoline had heated to 172 degrees Fahrenheit, just 33 degrees below the temperature where it would spontaneously ignite. He closed the station the next day. By 1981, it was clear that Centralia was sitting on top of a bomb, a slow-burning, ever-expanding bomb that would eventually consume everything. The cemeteries told their own stories. Centralia has 3 of them: Odd Fellows, St. Peter and Paul, Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, all of them sitting on ground touched by the fire. On certain days, when the humidity is high and the temperature drops, these graveyards fill with low-hanging fog that doesn't quite look natural. Smoke mixed with mist, steam rising between the headstones like breath from buried mouths. People who visit report seeing shapes moving through that fog. Human shapes. Silhouettes that walk between the graves and then vanish when you look directly at them. One visitor described watching what looked like a man in old-fashioned mining clothes standing among the stones. She blinked, and he was gone. Just smoke curling up from the ground where he'd been standing. Local legend says the dead miners walk above their graves, that the heat rising from below has disturbed their rest, that they're trying to warn the living to leave before it's too late. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's something deeply wrong about those cemeteries. The way the smoke follows certain paths between the graves. The way the ground feels soft underfoot in places where it should be solid. The way sound seems muffled, like you're hearing everything through water. The dead sleep atop an oven in Centralia, and nobody knows what that might wake up. If you want to hear true horror, though, find one of the old mine shaft openings. There are dozens scattered around Centralia. Vertical shafts that drop straight down into the abandoned tunnel system. Some are sealed with concrete. Some are just covered with rusted metal grates. Some are open. The sound that comes from these shafts is unlike anything else. Hot air rising through hundreds of miles of underground tunnels creates natural acoustic chambers. The wind through those passages produces a low, constant moan, like the earth itself is groaning in pain. But sometimes, if you listen carefully, you hear other things. Voices. Distant and distorted, but unmistakably human. Some people say it's just the wind playing tricks. The way sound echoes and warps through the tunnels, but others swear they've heard screaming. Raw, desperate screaming that rises from deep below and then cuts off suddenly. One former resident described standing near a mine vent and hearing what sounded like dozens of men shouting all at once. Overlapping voices, angry, frightened. He couldn't make out words, just the tone, the emotion, like standing at the mouth of something alive, something that's been digesting the mountain for decades and isn't finished yet. By the mid-1980s, Centralia was dying. The fire had spread under most of the town. Roads buckled and cracked like dried clay. Steam rose from manholes and storm drains. The power company had to relocate underground cables because the insulation was melting. Route 61, the main highway through town, developed such severe cracks and deformations that the state had to reroute it completely. The old section of road was abandoned, left to twist and buckle as the ground beneath it heaved and settled. Trees throughout Centralia turned black, not just dead, but carbonized. Their trunks were warm to the touch. Smoke leaked from splits in the bark where the internal wood was smoldering. People reported finding birds dead in their yards, just dropped from the sky mid-flight. Autopsies showed carbon monoxide poisoning. The gas was everywhere now, rising through the soil in invisible clouds. People fainted in their yards, got dizzy walking to their cars, developed chronic headaches and nausea that wouldn't go away. Children were getting sick. The elderly were having heart problems. The town was being poisoned from below. The government finally acted. In 1983, Congress allocated $42 million for voluntary relocation. Most residents took the money and left. They packed up entire lifetimes in a matter of weeks, walked away from houses their grandparents had built. One woman stood in her kitchen for the last time and couldn't stop crying. That house had raised her children. Her parents had lived there before her, and now she was just leaving it to burn. By 1990, only 63 people remained, stubborn, angry, refusing to believe it was over. In 1992, Pennsylvania Governor Bob Casey invoked eminent domain. Every property in Centralia was condemned. The state owned it all now. The handful of holdouts fought in court for years. 7 households eventually reached an agreement in 2013. They could stay until death. Then the state would take their homes. In 2002, the U.S. Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code. Officially, the town no longer existed. But the fire didn't care about paperwork. It kept burning. It's still burning now, under what's left of Centralia, and spreading beyond the old town borders. Some estimates say it covers 400 acres underground. Others say it's closer to 1,000. Nobody knows for sure, because mapping an underground fire is nearly impossible. What they do know is that it won't stop. The coal seam beneath Centralia is massive. There's enough fuel down there to keep this fire burning for 250 more years, maybe longer. Your grandchildren's grandchildren will still be able to visit Centralia and see steam rising from the earth. The fire is permanent now, a scar on the landscape that will outlive everyone alive today. And then there are the stories that don't quite fit. The ones that sound like urban legends, but come from too many sources to dismiss completely. The ghost car, for instance. Dozens of people over the years have reported seeing an old, white car driving through Centralia at dusk. Always the same car. 1960s model, no license plate, no driver visible through the windows. It appears suddenly in the fog, drives slowly down one of the abandoned streets, and then vanishes, just dissolves into smoke. Some say it belonged to a miner who died in the early days of the fire, that he's still trying to drive home, still doesn't know his house burned down 30 years ago. Whether it's real or not, people keep seeing it, and nobody who sees it wants to talk about it afterwards, like acknowledging it out loud might make it more real. There's one building in Centralia that defies all logic. The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Ukrainian Catholic Church. It sits on Paxton Street, completely untouched by the fire. Services are still held there. The building stands on solid bedrock, a small geological miracle that put it just out of reach of the flames below. But locals claim there's something else protecting it. They say the patch of ground around the church stays cooler than anywhere else in Centralia. That the temperature inside during Sunday service is always comfortable, even when steam is rising from the street outside. That sometimes, early in the morning, you can hear singing coming from inside when the building is locked and empty. Prayers echoing in the nave, with no one there to speak them. The church stands like a monument to faith in a town consumed by fire, a reminder that some things survive even when everything else burns. Today, Centralia is a ghost town in the most literal sense. Empty streets, foundations where houses used to stand, warning signs everywhere, danger, underground mine fire. Walking or driving in this area could result in serious injury or death. The famous graffiti highway, that twisted section of abandoned Route 61 covered in spray paint, was finally buried in 2020. Too many trespassers, too much liability. They covered it with 400 truckloads of dirt. But you can still see steam rising through the soil in places. The fire doesn't care about dirt. It doesn't care about anything. It just burns. 5 people still live there. 5 residents who refuse to leave. They live in a town that officially doesn't exist, surrounded by warning signs and smoking earth. They tend gardens that grow in toxic soil. They drive on roads that crack a little more each year. They hear the moaning from the mine shafts and smell the sulfur and watch the steam rise every morning like clockwork. When asked why they stay, most just shrug. This is home. This is where they've always been. The fire can have everything else, but it won't have them. Not yet. At night, Centralia is completely dark. No street lights, no porch lights, just darkness and fog and the orange glow of steam, illuminated by whatever's burning below. If you drive through after sunset, which you shouldn't, because the roads are treacherous and the ground can open without warning, you might see those 5 houses, lights on in the windows, curtains drawn, lives being lived in defiance of hell itself. And you might wonder what it takes to stay in a place like that. What kind of stubbornness or love or madness keeps you in a town that's been burning alive for over 60 years. The fire spreads about 75 feet per year, slowly, inexorably, consuming everything in its path. Some scientists think it might eventually burn itself out once it exhausts the accessible coal seams. Others think it could burn for 500 years or more. Nobody knows. Nobody can predict the behavior of something this large, this deep, this relentless. What they do know is that Centralia is a warning, a reminder that humans are small and the earth is old and some mistakes can't be undone. That sometimes we open doors we can't close, and what comes through those doors doesn't care about our plans or our hopes or our survival. It just is, and it will keep being long after we're gone. Centralia burns. It has burned for over 60 years. It will burn for centuries more. And somewhere beneath those streets, beneath those cemeteries, beneath that one defiant church, the fire waits. Patient, eternal, hungry, ready to swallow anything foolish enough to stand on ground that's already been claimed by the flames below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves creepy stories. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. Because this is just the beginning. The next story might be darker, and you won't want to miss it.